So I'm really excited to be here. And Katia, thank you so much for bringing me on. I will try, for the sake of the group, go as fast as possible through my slides. And I can just let everyone know that I have plenty of other online resources. So if my talk is of interest to any young scientists, please just reach out to me and you can follow me on socials. I'll provide that at the end. And I have a lot of webinars, YouTube channels, Instagram, everything that's got a ton of resources. So my name is Dr. Kim Baldwin. I am a research associate at the University of the West Indies in Barbados, CERMES, the Environmental Studies Department. I'm also the director of my own company, Marine Spatial Information Solutions. So I'm going to talk today about drone technology in particular, just because of the topic of our session today. But I also do a lot of work in GIS too, here in the Caribbean. So I'm based in Barbados, but I work all throughout the entire region. So just briefly, a little bit about who am I? I'm a marine ecologist, actually, by trade. I was born and raised here in San Diego, California, and I did my first degree at UCSB in California. I'm giving you guys a background because I know you're many young scientists that are on this webinar right now. And I think that the point of the story is I had no clue what I was doing when I started, and I had no idea when I started my marine biology journey, let's say 20 years ago. I won't age myself any more than that, where I'd be today, that I'd be using drones. So my background initially was pre-med, and I switched the last moment of my college degree to marine biology because I realized I just loved field research. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I just knew that I liked being outdoors in nature and doing ecology field research. So I decided I'd switch with zero experience or background in marine biology, but I had done a bunch of electives and jumped on that train. And one thing led to the next. I got my first job where I fell in love with the Caribbean in the Turks and Caicos Islands, working for the School for Field Studies, which is research, a study abroad program through Boston University. And that's really where I fell in love with the Caribbean, diving, and marine ecology in general, marine biology. I was teaching students in water how to do reef surveys. And from there I was working for $4 a day. And I think young kids today forget that internships, even if it's not exactly what you want to do, you get a lot of experience. You might not get paid a lot, but it can help you. And I always encourage people to just do, when you're young scientists, try everything and see what gravitates, see what resonates, see what other opportunities. You're never too good for anything, is the attitude I always have. And you should always be keen to learn new things. And so from that opportunity, I got an offer to come to the University of the West Indies in Barbados. That was 22 years ago, and do my master's at CERMES. And I ended up staying on and doing a PhD there. So my master's and PhD were in marine mapping. My emphasis at CERMES was fisheries and coastal ecology. I'm also a dive master. I've been teaching GIS and drones, but GIS for over 15 years at UWI, many graduates all throughout the region I've taught. And I'm also now, since 2016, a commercial drone pilot. I have a license here in the United States, a Part 107 license, but I also have licenses in over 9 Caribbean countries. So I've been teaching and training people since 2016 just in drones. But as I said, I have more than 20 years, and where my roots really are, where the drones came into the scene, is that I had been doing environmental impact assessments. I've been doing marine mapping and monitoring, diving, doing field research, and GIS and marine spatial planning. And so when the drones came hot on the scene, all of a sudden I realized, whoa, I knew way back then this would be the next big thing. And I think just in the last year or two, everybody else in the Caribbean that works environmental management are realizing it really is. But the ability to buy an off-the-shelf drone and be able to collect images in real time about the marine environment and make more informed and accurate decisions was really when I just knew I had to get on that vein. So I'd like to start this off by really, in terms of marine spatial planning, marine ecology, and what the cornerstones of sustainable development, which are also the cornerstones of the principles that guide my work and my mission is that we need to combine social, economic, and conservation priorities at the same time. And what I realized working throughout the region in GIS and creating all this data and doing marine monitoring is that really we needed to work more with people in order to strengthen our capacity across the region for environmental management. We needed to better, as scientists, be able to collaboratively collect and create more comprehensive information, not just conventional science, but social information, economic information, understand the dynamics of communities. How are people working together? And that was really this more wider participatory approach is what was needed to cultivate ecological health and social well-being on multiple levels. At that point, I switched the mission of my work and my company to really look at tech more and use how can we use tech and geoinformatic tools, off-the-shelf apps and drones and all these different types of technology and computer advances to strengthen the application of ecosystem-based management in the Caribbean. And I really shifted my work from that point, from planning and creating to training and capacity building. And back when this started, maybe in 2010, 2008, I was focused more on GIS, using Google Earth and other tools to create holistic information and work with communities to map local knowledge of problems and issues and solutions. Obviously, I got into the drone. How did I get into the drones initially? Well, initially I'm self-taught. You can see up in the top right corner, I have two brothers. And in 2015, we all got our first drones. Both of them are photographers. One's a big famous YouTuber and the other one is a surf photographer. And I was a marine biologist. So we all got our drones. They were gamers. They were amazing. And day two, I shut off my engines in the air and my drone dropped out of the air. So I learned pretty quick the ins and outs. And I got my first job, actually. I knew I had my first job with drones before I even bought a drone because I'd been doing the GIS mapping. So I was already out on a mission or had a job to actually train people and develop a drone procedural operations manual for the government of Antigua. So I developed my first training curriculum for drone mapping in 2016, actually, the same year that I became a commercial pilot. But the way I was trained, because I was trained by some experts from the US in a very short period, and then I had to develop a curriculum to train across the Caribbean, that the technology wasn't really appropriate for our needs in the Caribbean. So I did a lot of work. I could say I probably did a whole nother PhD since 2015, researching all the various drones, hardware, equipment, software, as well as the different ways we could use drones for environmental management. And so over the last few years, I've really developed and identified tools that are easy to use, but relevant to the Caribbean context, to our skills, our capacity in terms of internet access and data, as well as money, right? A lot of times we see these really cool solutions, but you think living and working in the Caribbean, we can't afford that. So that's where my research and my focus has been in terms of the drone, integrating drones. So why are drones being used for environmental monitoring and management? Well, there's just the main reasons why, and it's more the monitoring and management. People are using drones for working purposes besides photography are ease of use, usually also cost. If you're using an off-the-shelf drone, you can buy a mapping drone now for about $1,000 US. And a lot of times for science, it's really useful because it allows us in a very minimally invasive ways to access places and collect information in ways that were virtually impossible. There's a whole different variety of ways that I've worked with teams and agencies. Like I said, I've probably worked in over 10 Caribbean countries in the last few years on a variety. These are just some of the ways that I've used drones for the environment. The biggest is mapping and monitoring environmental changes, understanding changes over time, understanding effectiveness of marine protected areas or different management measures, being able to capture and create digital twins, let's say, of historical sites or use drones more recently since COVID. I've done a lot of work with FAO and drones for national food security, planning and using drones, machine learning, and AI tools to identify the health of crops, but also when to harvest them, using drones a lot now, more recently for climate change, understanding impacts before and after disasters, and how to get in and manage and deal with it. What's the most effective way if all the roads are blocks for people to get in? Also using drones to, my favorite is participatory mapping and understanding the socioeconomic drivers. And when there is a disaster, or sargassum, who's being impacted, whose livelihoods, how many users are there? And by having an aerial picture even, let alone a drone map, you are able to glean a lot of very useful information. But because this is a Caribbean talk, I would like to talk about, it is a bit more challenging working in the Caribbean, perhaps, than maybe other places in the world, which I find exciting. I always tell my students at UWI, you know what, you don't see it going to UWI. Some people say, oh, well, and I went to UWI, I did my master's and PhD at UWI. And so you think, oh, we're behind the rest of the world, or, oh, if we only had funding the way they do in America or in the UK. No, that can be a huge benefit. It teaches you how to, I like to say MacGyver, it was an old school show back when I was a kid, but how to rig things. You have to use your head in the Caribbean, right? Because we don't have all the big money everybody does. So sometimes you need to be thinking more in the entrepreneurial spirit, which is why I love working with young people, because there is so many new technologies and ways of doing things that maybe older generations aren't even thinking about. So as I mentioned, there's a challenge in terms of we a lot of times have inadequate resources. Working in the Caribbean, we have extremely challenging environments. We've got wind, we've got heat, we've got humidity. The terrain, a lot of times, hard to access, to get into. We don't have data and cell signal. Either you can't afford it, or maybe you don't have it in the areas that you're working in, the mountains or in the remote areas. Many times in terms of capacity, we have very limited amount of computers and a software available. Then a lot of times, like in our last presentation, we were talking about sea turtles. We're working across the whole region. Animals and marine life, and even our atmosphere, sargassum, it's going across the region. You can't just manage in your country climate change, right? We need to take a wider approach, and not just a geographical extent, but also the various levels of people that you need to engage or understand environmental management. It ranges from the community level to maybe the national level. We've got government decision makers, and we've got researchers, and then we also have the whole world, right? And the public that we need to engage. So this is where I find drones very useful. So when you're looking to apply drones for environmental management, I can't really get into details because I'm trying to make up here a bit of time. You need to clearly identify and understand, what do you want to use drones for? People get really excited and they're like, yeah, drones. No, I always tell people, reel it back. What are you trying to do with the drones? What data do you need to collect? What scale, what resolution? Because the more detailed data you need, the exponentially more it costs, right? So you need to find, you always in science need to find that sweet balance. What is the application? Is it for management? Is it for science? Is it for outreach and education? Because there's different types of data and information you need for different accuracy of data, but also for different audiences, right? I'm not going to be showing a group of fishermen hardcore GIS data. If I show them a really great 360 pano or a great video, that might be more engaging to have conversations with. So you need to understand all of that to identify which drones, which software, what type of training, and what kind of monitoring plan you're going to set up. So today I'm going to use a case study. I'm going to talk about sargassum management, because that is something that is pretty much impacting every country in the Caribbean at this point in time. And so I was approached with the same question. So I'm going to walk you through my typical thought process when I determine how I'm going to use drones for environmental management. So back in 2018, Professor Oxenford at Cerames approached me, and she wanted to understand, well, she was just doing it in an old school science way, how much sargassum's washing up on the beach. So they were scooping up buckets and measuring it and then running quadrats and transects and then trying to interpolate this mathematical formula to estimate how much is washing up on the beach. And I saw what they were doing and I was like, this is ridiculous. We could be flying a drone, we could be using AI, machine learning, and I could probably tell you in a matter of minutes how much sargassome's on that beach without having to lift heavy buckets and do all this work. So that's where my journey began. So as I mentioned, the first thing I said to her is, what are the applications or purpose that we want to use drones for? And she said, well, first, and this is typical of most drone applications, you have multiple applications that the information could be used for. So you really want to make a good game plan before you go out there and start collecting data. All science. This is, again, I'm talking about drones today, but this is what I teach in general when I'm teaching people about environmental mapping and monitoring is identify your need, your application first. So she said they wanted to understand how much sargassum is washing up on the beaches for management, for cleanup purposes, for the entrepreneurs that wanted to use it. We didn't need to know exactly to the centimeter how much was there, but just how many truckloads, how many boatloads, what was the general quantities washing up across the Caribbean? Because if we're going to try to get markets to invest in sargassum, let's say for biofuel or fertilizer, we needed to know how much across the year, what was the seasonality and how much and where was this stuff washing up on beaches. Next was another group of scientists at the university I'm working with that wanted to use the information for local knowledge mapping, for development of national sargassum management plans, and to understand the impacts on communities. So we needed that type of information. And then there was also another component of our project that was really looking at collaboration with different groups, with public participation, education, and outreach. So I had multiple applications when I started to develop this monitoring protocol that I wanted to encompass in the data collection. As I mentioned, I started this research in 2019, and it took me about 3 years to develop the workflow that I have developed today that we are now scaling across the Caribbean. But I did a lot of research in different types of drone flight plans, mapping surveys, what pictures, what videos would be useful at what flying heights, at what angles, etc. I also got a grant from WCS, the World Conservation Society, and National Geographic to get underwater drones to see, we wanted to look at the biodiversity of the animals under the water as well. So this is really exciting. We're using drones aerially and underwater to understand sargassum management. And then, because I am a scientist, there's a lot of automated web dashboard tools, machine learning, automated tools that were out there, and I didn't really trust them. So I did a lot of research in the field, measuring things, let's say, the volume of sargassum or the height of sargassum, and then running it through the GIS and the automated tools and seeing how accurate was it, right? Because I didn't want to put my name on this and go out there and train people unless I knew it was indeed true and correct. So I did a lot of work on that, the GIS, like I said, these automated, because again, I wanted to scale this across the Caribbean. And as a GIS lecturer of over 15 years, I know, and I'm teaching master's students, GIS is not an easy thing to learn. It stresses people out, especially at the beginning. The learning curve's high. So I figured out how to do the workflow in GIS, but it was very difficult. And so I said, okay, are there other tools out there that are easier to use that we could maybe use, and then it would spit the results out into GIS? And then again, we didn't have big, strong computers. I did because I'm a nerd and I'm a GIS person, but on average, most of my stakeholders had just a regular laptop. They didn't have supercomputers. They didn't have storage space. Drone data, when you go out and fly, some days I'm collecting up to 10 gigabytes of data a day. So how are we going to host and share and access all this data across the Caribbean? So these are some of the challenges I had to think through and work through over that 3-year period. So I ended up for this application choosing a drone mapping software called Drone Deploy. As I mentioned, there's many different software packages out there, and there's different. And so someone says, what's the best drone? What's the best software? It depends on your application, okay? There is no one size fits all solution. So for this application, I chose off-the-shelf DJI drones. We were using Phantom 4s at the time and Mavic 2 Pros. There's different drones now, okay, because the drone world's progressed. So I can't get into all the models that we're using today, but a mapping grade drone, just an off-the-shelf with a regular camera. And then Drone Deploy is a software that allows you to fly and create drone maps, but it also allows you to upload into the cloud, and it's processed virtually, so you don't need a big computer. And then it spits you back your information in a web dashboard that allows you to analyze and explore some of the trends and also create a summary report in a PDF. So this really was a game changer for me. It helped me get over that regional GIS capacity bottleneck that I've had for 15 years. I've been struggling with this in many projects I work on, collecting GIS data around the region. So this was a really exciting project and development for me. And then we got support from Drone Deploy, who is now giving free drone software to all my teams around the Caribbean collecting sargassum data. So this has been exciting. I also, as part of this research, have developed a sargassum monitoring protocol. We have a good practice users guide, which I'll share at the end, but also a drone training course. So the caveat is that all of these people that I had trained this summer, I trained people virtually, but they had already received a 1-week boot camp. So they had already learned how to fly drones and how to use mapping software previous to this very niche specialized drone for sargassum monitoring protocol. So I teach in person, but I also have a virtual training academy online that I built since COVID. And so I launched that class virtually through my training academy with live Q&A and webinars every week with my teams, but it guided them through self-paced lessons and videos, and then they would go out. And so over a month period, we identified and set up monitoring sites. So I guided my students, into planning the mission and selecting their monitoring beaches, to setting up and conducting drone surveys. So not just how to go out there and do the surveys, but also safety assessments, feasibility assessments. And then, like most drone data, it doesn't just spit out. Drones don't replace people. They don't replace scientists. They just make our jobs easier. So for most drone applications, you still need to do some ground truthing data. You still need to give it some field data to make the information the most usable. So for the sargassum monitoring protocol, you still need to do very quick, rapid field surveys looking at the depth with a little stick on your beach of the sargassum. But the rest of it is all done with the drone and some Excel analysis that I'll talk about in a minute. And then we trained our teams how to deal with the data, how to manage it, how to assess the quality, but also how to use these web analytical tools and create summary reports on their monitoring beach so that they could share, whether it's through the report or web maps or 360 panoramas or videos, with their stakeholders, the information they had been collecting. So I can't get into this well just due to time, but the drone monitoring protocol is not just you go up and you fly one thing. We actually are doing 5 different drone surveys at the beach, and each one of these surveys has a different end user and purpose and application. Some are for the communities, some data is for the abundance of sargassum, some of it's just using for the participatory mapping aspects. And then some's like other scientists are using for the forecasting models. They want to see, are their models true and correct? So this is publicly accessible data. It's free access through Drone Deploy, and that I can talk about later. So here's some of the results I just want to say. So step 1, we went out, here's an example for my team. So I trained teams in 5 countries under the SargAdapt project, which was the grant that funded this. So here's some results from St. Lucia. So step 1, you conduct your survey. Step 2, you need to do a very rapid beach survey. Now, this entire process can happen in under an hour from flying the drones and the beach survey on any beach, no matter how much sargassum you have. So we've developed this to be very easy to use, rapid. So you do need to do, as I mentioned, some very basic ground measurements, which our user's guide and my training course has videos and explains exactly how to do this. I think, let's see if I can show you very quickly. Yeah, this is a quick time-lapse video. I this shows Michaela and I. So we did our drone map, and then we do this very quick survey. We run 5 transects that you can get done in a matter of a few minutes to get our data. So then you go back and you have to deal with your data. So you have to upload your drone data into the drone deploy dashboard. And there's some different analysis that we train students how to do in drone deploy, but also there's some Excel work too that gets done because you have to enter your field work, but we provide an Excel table that has like the macros built in. So you basically enter the data and it spits out the results. So wrapping up here, the flight survey. So what was the steps? 1, we conducted flight surveys. 2, we train people, or we've working with people to use automated, not GIS, using web mapping tools that actually will help classify and understand the volume and the beach profiles and the different information you need. Beauty is, here's just some more examples of, you can measure things in 3D. You can get volume of within this. And like I said, we did a lot of tests back and forth. But what I love is that this can be it can be exported, all the data, into GIS. So you can create GIS data and share it with your GIS analysts without even having to know much or anything about GIS. So then we train people how to create these reports, how to understand accuracy, or if there was any problems with their drone surveys. Like I mentioned, we're also collecting 360 panos that could be shared on WhatsApp, that can be shared as URL links, because there's different stakeholders that don't really care about seeing the map, right? They just want to see pictures. That's what gets them engaged. So you need to understand your audience. And I think another great point here for the young scientists in the crowd is, my skills is not so much my brain. My skills are social, being able to work and communicate with people. And I think as a scientist, especially when I started, I never really took that skill. I just thought it was second nature. And the more and the older I get, I realize that's a very important skill. So if you're a young scientist that's just maybe a little more into people and you can communicate and work with people well, there is a great, bright world ahead of you in terms of science, and you are very needed. There are many scientists that cannot communicate with people. And that is something that I really want to encourage people today, that all scientists, they're not wearing lab coats and these nerds in the lab doing genetics and other things. There's a lot of people like me that are out there just working with people, are the ones we need to manage more than the animals a lot of points in time. So in conclusion, just this first cohort of training this summer, like I mentioned, we trained over 51 people from 21 organizations. This is just a really pretty infographic as a breakdown of who was trained. Now I'm moving on with this research. I've trained now in September the next cohort of students, which emanate from the countries of Anguilla, Montserrat, and the British Virgin Islands. And I'm building on under the next grant funded by Darwin Plus and implemented by Canary and Trinidad, how to use the drone mapping information for a different application, which is that participatory mapping of the social and economic information, as well as the local knowledge, the community's impacts, the community's mitigation measures and solutions as well. So I'm really excited about this next phase. Also, if you're interested, I can share with you a paper that I published. It's available also on the CERME's website, but it is an overview of how drone technology can be used for participatory mapping of Caribbean coastal communities, fisheries, climate change issues, etc. And with that, I'd like to conclude and just say thanks. I've added a QR code that you guys can scan that gives you a lot more links to my socials, but also to other podcasts, videos. I think a podcast that I did with Kadiha, the Eco Vibes podcast, and I've got several other YouTube videos. I try to get out on different types of networks. So if you're interested in learning more, I also have you could email me, you could check my training academy, drkimbaldwin.com. And I'd like to thank particularly CERME's, the University of the West Indies, and the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, who funded a lot of that sargassum research. All right, so thanks. Do we have time for questions, or are we done, Kadia?
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I'm seeing, wow, this was extremely interesting. Love it. Thank you all so much for staying on. I feel like we could get maybe 2 questions in. So the first 2 people to ask questions, if you have any, now is the time, go for it, or else you would have to reach out separately on social media. Stuff. I am not seeing any coming up in the chat, but I just need to let you know that when SOA is organizing its next set of funding, I am going to put in there for you to come to Trinidad, as well as train some of the other youths in Barbados and some of the other islands on using drones for marine conservation, because I think it's extremely cool what the work that you have going on. And I'm seeing a lot of great presentation, love the work you're doing, and very interesting. So
yeah, I just love, especially training. When I was in this last overseas territories, I trained several people that were 18, 19 years old, 20 years old. And I just love training young people, because you guys grew up with this stuff. You grew up with the tech. It's not that the old people can't do it, they can, but the young people, the rate and the skills, even when I talk to ministers in the Caribbean, it's a very small investment. And using drone mapping is something that it can be scaled very quickly across the Caribbean and train people very quickly with just a little investment.
Yeah, I'm seeing somebody saying I use drones for my final year project and I would love to connect. So Kimberly, if possible, maybe you could drop your details in the chat while I'm giving my wrap-up speech.
Yeah,
but
and I think I put the thing up there, but I put the link tree up there, but I'll put the link tree in the chat right now. Thanks, Kadia.
No problem. I see Carla is asking if there's something like this going on in Puerto Rico, like if you're doing training in Puerto Rico right now.
I have not had any requests in Puerto Rico, because that's the US, not because it's US. I train up here in the US, but no, most of the funding, because I usually put on a lot of trainings under grants for organizations. So it just depends where the funding, but I've got like 15 coming up next year, but Puerto Rico is not one of them.
Oh, well, we'll see if we can add to that number. Yeah.
I'm open to it.
Yeah, and I'm also seeing our last speaker, Michelle, is saying excellent presentation, Kim. So many possible applications and very important points about study design and adapting to limitations. And quite interesting, the next slide on Michelle's presentation actually talked about using drones in sea turtle conservation. So you came in at a very good time talking about drone technology and stuff. So
yeah, I trained the sea turtle project in Barbados. One of the slides that I had with the red circle, that was actually a leatherback nest, because now they're able to fly 9 kilometers of beach, and they can zoom in and see and mark turtles without even, and their accessibility, the remote area of the East Coast was what their holdout back was. So great. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, so maybe there could be some connection there for sure. Once again, guys, so sorry that we had to go over time. It's like now 3:22, but I'm very happy to see that most of you all stayed on. And Michelle, once again, very sorry that I had to cut you, but like I said, all the slides, presentations, everything will be available on the drive, and we would send you all that information so you'll be able to get it and go over it at your own time and own pace, as well as the contact details for all our speakers. So I once again would just like to give a very big thank you to you, Kimberly, to Michelle, to Brandon, and to Jeffrey, our amazing presenters today. I feel like we got a lot of information, and one of the feedback I keep getting from the session so far is that people are now seeing new avenues they could go into the marine science space. So that is one of the goals. So I'm very glad that with your presentations, we are opening the minds, and I love that. And tomorrow's session is a different time. Let me get that up real quick before I give you all the wrong time. So tomorrow we start at 10 a.m. and tomorrow's session is Ocean Science in Action, where we'll be looking at AI technology and whale monitoring and like marine robotics and stuff like that. And it would not be as, let's say we won't have as much equations tomorrow as we had today, but still very much interesting and engaging. And once again, so happy that all of you all joined and stayed on. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. And don't forget to fill out the attendance. And if you missed previous, well, it was only yesterday. So if you missed yesterday's session, the recording will be sent to you as well with questions. So I'm seeing a lot of thank you, Dr. Baldwin, and thank you, everyone. So with that, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Kimberly, you have the whole day ahead of you. We are already late into the afternoon. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your day, and we will be back tomorrow. And remember, if you are interested, definitely reach out. All of our presenters thus far are very open to connecting with you. And trust me, they've connected with me because I sent a random message on social media and they responded. So do reach out and do connect, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Bye.